When did you watch someone's sanity slowly deteriorate? My sister passed away earlier this year and she was sick for a long time. During the last few months you could tell that it was becoming harder for her to think and respond. Paradoxically, it actually made her a lot nicer to me. We had never had a great relationship and I always believed she hated me, but during those last few months she said very few unkind things to me. It was hard to know that the only time we ever really got along was right before she passed away. I was living elsewhere at the time, but I heard about what happened to my friend. He was fairly normal. A little exceptional actually, as he was being scouted to get sponsored for skateboarding. Something he was very good at. He started acting really weird though. Things like opening his door just a bit when people came over and laughing at them. Throwing chairs and such around when at people's houses. Lying about things that were really obvious. Reading loudly from the Bible while wearing almost nothing outside in the middle of winter. Turns out he was schizophrenic. Last time I saw him was after I moved back and was living in a bad neighborhood. He was homeless, as was his dad who was with him. He didn't even recognize me. Just acted really scared that I was trying to talk to him. No one has seen or heard from him since then. I'm the last person to have seen him. That was 10 years ago. Watched my grandfather slowly sink into Alzheimer's. By the end he didn't know my name or his own. He was sad and angry and confused. I watched every week as he forgot a little more. Got a little more belligerent. A little more lost. Until one day I walked in and he started screaming that someone was there to rob him. It was the saddest f***ing thing I've ever seen. I have such vivid memories of watching him and my uncles have such animated debates about politics and movies and sports. They used to play Risk until the sun came up listening to Sinatra. He would sit and explain every single play in a baseball game to me as a kid. He was sharp as FCK, and the saddest and hardest part was watching the struggle on his face to remember. The frustration he felt. Like he was letting us down. I miss him a lot. My wife died of cancer 3 months ago. There were serious metastases to the brain. A baseball. A pair of golf balls and some other smaller pockets of disease. My wife was an intellectual badass. Held a doctorate. Played concert piano. And had an uncanny ability to make correct political decisions. Badass. In the 8-10 weeks leading up to her death, she slowly lost her ability to speak and perform executive functions. Sometimes in very interesting ways. The one I remember most was when she wanted a bowl of cereal. She had all the steps correct. But they were performed in the wrong order, so she poured the milk directly on the counter. Then got a bowl. Then turns the cereal box upside down, it was still closed. Then got confused because she couldn't find the opening of the box. It was no longer at the top. All the while milk was dripping on the floor. Terrible and fascinating. By the end, she couldn't feed herself because she couldn't remember where her mouth was. In the last 2 weeks, all she could do was cry like a 3-year-old. I miss her terribly. I was in high school and my best friend went from a normal guy who we would smoke weed occasionally, listen to music and have fun. It went to this obsession with a girl that clearly has no interest in him. He would literally stalk her. Try to win her over. At the same time, he wasn't keeping up with hygiene and went from a decent student to a poor performer. One day, he mentioned that he wanted to commit suicide, so I told my parents everything that was going on. His parents were extremely well educated but weren't doing anything about his behaviors. My parents talked to his and they took it serious after hearing about the thoughts of suicide. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Nearly 40 years later, he still doesn't look the same. Really sad situation. I still miss him. It was not really all that slow, but I watched my mother slip from genius level intelligence into a drooling brain-dead shell within 6 months when she died from CJD. It was the worst thing I have ever seen. And I have seen the terrors and atrocities of war. My ex best friend over the course of this past year has gone from a normal, Well-adjusted woman who held down a full-time job and a very nice apartment to constantly being online and talking about how humans are just slaves to an alien race that lives on Mars and how reality doesn't exist, and if she died none of it would matter because reality doesn't exist. I don't talk to her anymore because if I said anything in opposition, she would lose her shit on me. Very different from the kind, compassionate woman I was best friends with for 4 years. I miss her every day. Disclaimer. I know she's doing well. She has a great familial support system and other friends that agree with her beliefs. I just couldn't be one of them anymore. We can't force someone into help if they don't want to be helped. A friend's grandmother started filling her bedroom with statues. It started with the Infant of Prague and the Virgin Mary. Then St. Francis of Assisi. Then dozens more, several of them life-size. Her room got to the point where there wasn't one spot that wasn't taken up with statues except for her bed and a narrow walkway to the bathroom. My mom started going to online blogs and web radio shows about ghosts, aliens, conspiracies, and took it all at face value. I saw my normal mom turn into a complete, gullible ignoramus in a matter of months. Nobody could talk to her without her bringing up FEMA death camps, potential economic collapse, aliens, anti-vax, or Obama signing more executive orders than any president in history. Her friends thought she might have a brain tumor. She didn't. She did have cancer she was hiding, ignoring that ended up killing her. BC she thought cancer wasn't real. This is what happens to lonely people that are looking for a connection. They'll believe anything just to feel that they are a part of something. It was very sad that she was so unbearable the last couple years of her life. My grandmother began to mentally deteriorate many years ago. When I was young and didn't understand what was happening, she would stand up and move to the corner of the room and stare at the walls. When I asked my mom what was happening, she told me to not to worry and act normally. Took me a few years to process that and other quirks she developed before passing away. It was a harsh lesson in the realities of life, I guess. My grandma. I was in my early 20s when she fell and cracked her pelvis at my aunt's place. I made the 4-hour trip to see her and asked my aunt just how much medication they had her on. Turns out they diagnosed Alzheimer's after tests. She knew me that weekend. I stayed as long as they'd let me and she talked my ear off. I saw her about 2 months later. She thought I was my aunt, same build and hair color, and said I'd just missed my dad and called me by another aunt's name and the lady that had come with me by her real name, but asked when she and dad were getting married. That lady was dad's first girlfriend. Years before my mum, 22 years prior to that day. As I left a couple of hours later she called me my mum's name. I never saw her again. 28 years ago last August. Thank you for letting me get this out. When my stepmom left my dad, he spiraled way too deep into an opioid addiction. He would just lay down on the couch all strung out. Long story short, CPS was called multiple times, and after severe emotional abuse from him and manipulating and lying from his side of the family, young me was tricked into going back, and I keep beating myself up over it. Edit. Thanks for the award, kind stranger. Edit 3. Wow, thanks for another award, kind stranger. Several times throughout the course of this year, I lead a team of 15 or so, and while we're all grateful to have work, at different points in the year I've seen pretty acute signs of burnout and deteriorating mental health in at least half of them. It's been a learning experience for me, figuring out how to build mental health first aid into my management style, but I'm crazy proud of them all, and we juggle the work around where needed to support each other while still hitting deliverables. I am however ready for this pandemic to be f***ing over. Edit. Holy moly, I went for a walk with my so and this blew up. Thanks for the gold and all the amazing comments. First gold and not sure what to do with it, but very stoked. Mine included, we were in advanced training for the army, getting 4 hours of sleep a night, non-consecutive HRS. As the week progressed, we went from highly complex plans for missions to quite literally not being able to do basic math. Our base would start getting attacked right when we were about to lay down for an hour, and everyone would just start laughing like the Joker. It was laughter, but the insanity behind it was clear. I have never known the extreme effects of sleep deprivation until that week of field training. A week of your mind just failing. Great training though. 1/10 wouldn't recommend. Edit. For those wondering, I was in special operations, but a specific sub job that was pretty interesting. Wasn't as badass as Navy SEALs or Ranger, but we trained with some of them and at the same locations they trained. Bonus points. You train at those cool guy places and there are real toilets and showers. If you're part of the service, you know that never happens. And I mean never. It's hard when the person you are watching deteriorate is yourself. Source. I was diagnosed with psychotic depression and severe anxiety with panic attacks and OCD tendencies 2 years ago. Edit. Wow, this really exploded more than I thought it would. Reading all the responses really helped me feel less alone in the world. I'll reply with more info about my experience when I get off work. My mom gradually slipped into dementia. Oh. She KNW who? I was till she passed away. She was convinced it was 1964. Instead of 2007. She would ask me if I had seen certain people. She said their names and where they lived. She remembered vivid, and 100% correct, details of 1964. I always agreed and never questioned her about how she reconciled the fact that I was 10 back then and 53 in 2007. I love her and miss her every day. My grandmother has dementia and I'm her caregiver. So, the past few years. Probably selfish or self-centered, but my own. I was a guy with lots of friends. A good social life. Lucky and somewhat successful in many areas. Now I don't really know who I am. Why I feel like I feel. And my past memories feel like a movie. As if they had happened to somebody else. Somebody that isn't me. My mom passed away from cancer. A couple of months before her passing. She had dementia. She was still in her 50s at that time. She kept forgetting simple things and hallucinated. For example, she was hospitalized, but she kept on calling our dogs, which was of course at home, to come to her. It's a very sad moment because I couldn't talk to my mom anymore as she became this other person. It was the worst time of my life. Knowing she was still alive. But she didn't remember anything. Once you get to your 30s, you have more likely than not witnessed a friend or family member succumb to substance abuse. It's sad to say the least. Holy shit, so many of you deserve a warm hug and a 10-hour Waffle House rant therapy session. I love all of you who are sharing your stories and pray things get better for you. I watched a guy in my fraternity who was also my neighbor in the dorm I was at slowly develop and succumb to schizophrenia. It was honestly terrifying. He went from being a somewhat normal guy to being up for days because he was paranoid B was being watched and randomly driving the 5-hour trip back to his family's house and back because B thought he couldn't be surveilled while in his car. This led to him getting multiple felony speeding tickets. He dropped out of school the next year and would randomly show up to brothers' houses or apartments and ask to stay there. One day he showed up to our frat house. And someone was like, oh my god, he has a gun. I was carrying because I have CCW and went in there and talked to him for a bit. I got the gun from him and it was just a pellet gun. How slowly? Because it's mine. I moved to Germany 2 years ago. Had real trouble with the language. Making friends. And basically finding anything to do socially. Then I got furloughed. Where I was still getting paid. But only 60% of my former salary. This allowed for groceries and rent. But not much else. Also couldn't travel because pandemic. 6+ months of being paid to live and that's it. Which in turn means I gained 50 pounds. Finally got a job in the US. Started a month ago. But it's in a new area. In a part of the country I'd never been. It's better because I don't have to worry about language. And so far I like the job. But it's still a pandemic. Very hard to meet people. And to top it off, I'm not sure I haven't been changed because of it. I feel like I'm more irritable. less open, and find it harder to open up. And I was already an introvert before this. My own. I've become increasingly paranoid of my co-workers. They can be dicks, but not always. I've shut people out as a defense mechanism, but they see it as cold shoulder isolationism. I've tried reading more and more books, but certain topics about the books make me sound crazy. Astrology, especially. All in all, I feel like a man-child waiting for someone to come along and clean up my messes and set me up on the path I'm supposed to go on. The truth is, no one's coming, and my tantrums are just making my mental health worse. When I replayed the few months after my breakup in my head, I realized what a fall from grace I'd had. Thank FCK for Dutch healthcare and how seriously they take mental health. My partner. I spent years and years getting her to see a doctor, and when she finally did, she was diagnosed with a condition. She took the medication and the severe mood swings stopped. The arguments stopped. The feeling of me walking on eggshells stopped. 3 weeks ago she took herself off them and it started all over again. I was good friends with someone in high school. He was really my only good friend. Mostly I was a shy kid that got bullied, but he was one of the few who would stick up for me. We did everything together, and when we went to college we were roommates. I even got him a job where I was working at one point a few years out of college, and we were roommates again for a while. One night he met his future wife, and within months he had moved in with her. Eventually she got pregnant. They got married, and he moved away. Over the next couple decades he slowly morphed into this hardcore Christian right-wing. Coronavirus is a myth. Nobody can make me wear a mask. Donald Trump is Jesus reborn kind of guy. Dude is just batshit crazy now. Worked the admissions unit at a state hospital prison facility. I'm watching my wife very quickly descend into a schizophrenic nightmare world, and all I can do is watch. We are separated, but I still care about her well-being. She has a history of drug-induced psychosis, but over the last few years she has made progress. Over the past few weeks, however, she has very rapidly developed new and scary delusions. It is starting to affect my mental health as well. The worst part is this. She refuses to seek treatment because she thinks her delusions are real. And since she is not threatening herself or others, I cannot force her into treatment. Her future is one of the following. She will either 1. Get better naturally. 2. Kill herself, or 3. Maintain or get worse and be one of the many gathering mentally ill homeless you see in every US city. Me. Over the past few years I went from a happy and very successful person with a promising future to feeling compulsively suicidal. I made 10ish credible attempts at my life in roughly 2 years and was hospitalized 3x. No one could figure out why I was so depressed and hopeless, or why the medications weren't working. I was exhausted and exhausting to be around. Few were able to really support me through chronic attempts to die. I became a completely different person. I lost my long-term relationship and alienated myself from my family. I felt completely betrayed by my own brain. This year my doctors inadvertently discovered a brain tumor. It was affecting my moods and emotional regulation. It's crazy how something so small can have such a big effect. I'm still picking up the pieces of what happened. My father-in-law on Facebook. One time, like a year ago, I saw someone with a pro bumper sticker still. That is absolutely gonna be my father-in-law with Trump 2020. He posted a map the other day that showed geographically where the candidates' votes came from, and was like, but the blue guy won, comma. And I had to explain that yes, that's how dense our population is in those areas. Watching our DM trying to coordinate a group of millennials and 30-somethings with kids for a weekend session. 30-somethings with kids are millennials. Source. I'm one. Born in 80s. Mine. My depression got worse as time passed by. I got diagnosed by a professional this year, but I feel like I had it for much longer. I'm a husk. I'm empty. What used to be me is dead. I don't know how I feel, but I know it's nowhere near tolerable. I knew a girl in college who was one of the unfortunate ones who developed full-blown schizophrenia after she started smoking weed. She would mostly just chat online. But that became untenable because she would type so fast, and even when it was halfway sensical there just wasn't enough time to respond. I eventually had to block her because it was just me observing an insane monologue. I checked on her years later and found several mugshots from her hometown with weird charges. And she looked totally different. It was a sad decline.